Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching YourTown television. I'm with Dennis Taylor, reporter. Kaboom, here we are, part two.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get right to it. So you've done tons of interviews, but there's been a couple that are really remarkable. I want to talk to about John Nash. That's really interesting. For those who don't remember, John Nash was if you remember the movie A Beautiful Mind.
Yeah.
So let's go into that a little bit.
John Nash was the paranoid, schizophrenic, mathematical genius that Russell Crowe played in that movie. A lot of people saw that movie. Most people, it seems like, saw that movie. But I was sitting at the Herald one night, and I was just winding down my shift. My editor was on the phone across the room talking, and he hangs up the phone. And he said, "Dennis, what are you doing over there?" And I said, "Not much, I'm cleaning some things up." He said, "Get your butt over to Naval Postgraduate School." He said, "The guy that Russell Crowe played in A Beautiful Mind, John Nash, is over there. He's going to talk to the math students. Just go over there and cover his talk. The PR guy's waiting for you." So I went over there, met the PR guy. He led me into this big auditorium, which was just packed with these mathematical PhD students. And John Nash got on the stage and just started drawing equations on this blackboard and mumbling into the microphone, and all the guys are taking notes. And man, he talked for an hour. I didn't understand a friggin' word he said. It was Chinese to me. I was an English major, folks. So afterwards, in my peripheral vision, I can see the PR guy staring at me, and I look over at him, and he says, "So you got all that, Dennis?" And I said, "No." And he laughed, and he said, "Well, come on." So he walks me about 80 feet to their green room, and I walk in there, and it's John Nash and John Nash's wife. John Nash is about 70-ish, and his wife and his adult son, who was in his 50s, and John Nash's son also, I guess this is really rare, also a paranoid, schizophrenic mathematical genius. And he didn't participate in the interview, but I didn't have any idea what to ask John Nash. I was going in there cold. I was supposed to cover write something about his speech, which was Chinese. So I broke the ice by talking to him about the movie, and that was just spontaneous. What he thought of the movie, what he thought of Russell Crowe's portrayal, all this kind of stuff. And John Nash stared at the table the whole time. He was mumbling his answer to me, and his eyes were darting back and forth. He never ever made eye contact with me. He wasn't interested in this. And the whole time he's talking, I wasn't really listening. I'm tape recording it. And I'm thinking, what am I going to ask him next? Because I don't have any questions for this guy. And he stopped talking, and I looked at him. I said, "Would you mind talking to me about what your life was like at the peak of your problems with schizophrenia?" And he looked up, and he looked right at me, right in my eyes, and he said, "No, I'd like to talk about that." And he continued to look at me and just opened up, just bloomed. And for the next 45 minutes, I barely had to ask another question. He just couldn't wait for somebody to ask him that question. And the whole time that I'm listening to this, and this has happened to me 3 or 4 times in my career, my heart's pounding, and I'm just thinking what a privilege it is that I got to choose this career. This career chose me so very long ago, and this career that gives me the license to sit down with a guy like this and ask him a question like that, and then have him talk to you, man to man, one-on-one. And now I get to go back and write this story on deadline. What a thrill.
Baryshnikov.
I had followed another celebrity for 5 hours on Pebble Beach, and she knew, she was one of the only females playing in the golf tournament, and she was famous. That's why I wanted to interview her. She knew I wanted to talk to her. She's a politician. And when she putted out on number 18, I was standing there at the green waiting for her to come over to me so I could talk to her for a few minutes about her day on the golf course. I wasn't going to get into anything controversial. And she pivoted on her heel, walked to the golf cart with her caddy, and disappeared. And I'm right on deadline, and I'm thinking, okay, all right, now I'm screwed. What am I going to do? And I'm pacing back and forth behind the green. The next group or two putts out. And a few minutes later, I turn to my right, and Baryshnikov is standing 6 feet away, and he's looking over his scorecard. And I thought, oh my God, that is the most famous ballet dancer of his era, maybe of all time. You know, I don't know anything about ballet, but there he is. I got to talk to him. So, and this is the hard part about being a journalist. You know, you got to have cojones sometimes. And I walked up to him and asked him for 5 minutes to talk about his golf day, and he said sure. So we're standing there together, and I talked to him about his day on Pebble Beach, and then I asked him, I said, would you mind talking to me about how you escaped from the USSR? And he said, well, that's going to take a lot more than 5 minutes. And so I think, okay, he's going to walk away. And he said, yeah, okay. He says, let's go sit down. So we walked a little ways back and found a bench, and I sat down next to Baryshnikov, and he told me the whole story about he was dancing with the Bolshoi Ballet in either Toronto or Montreal. I think it was Toronto. They get done with their performance. They step out of the back of the arena. The bus is waiting for them. The whole ballet company is getting onto the bus. There's a rope line with all the people standing there calling Baryshnikov's name. He walks over there and starts signing autographs. And their security unit, probably KGB, walked over to him. They're saying, Mitya, no, 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 on the bus. Get on the bus with everybody else. And he basically said, you know, hey, cool your jets. These people were wonderful tonight. I'm going to thank them a little bit. He walks down the line, this rope line, signing autographs. He had a friend waiting for him a block and a half away in a running car. He saw an opening, went over the rope, and sprinted through this crowd with the KGB chasing him. He's jumping over people. He's jumping over things. And, you know, he's the athlete. They're not going to catch Mikhail Baryshnikov in his heyday. And he ran a block and a half, dove into a running car, and sped off. That's how he got out of the USSR. And he's telling me this story, this guy from the little old Monterey Herald, and I'm thinking, man, you know, what a job I have. What a thrill this is.
So let's
to hear this.
You're a big story to cover here. Let's go into comedy writing, because
okay.
Sports writing, then there's comedy. You've got a bent for comedy, and let's talk about Sam Kinison before he's famous.
Okay, that was a complete accident because I was writing sports for the Greeley Tribune at the time. I was playing softball at night. One of my softball teammates from a couple years earlier, Dave Parsons, had become a stand-up comedian at the LA Comedy Store, the comedy store. And so it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm sound asleep. My phone rings. I pick it up, and it's Parsons. And he's at some all-night diner with all these other comedians, and he's absolutely snot-hanging drunk. And he's saying, Dennis, I just had this idea. He said, it's called National Sports Laugh. Think of it as a cross between like Laugh-In and Hee Haw, but it's all sports-related comedy. We'll bring in famous athletes. We'll bring in comedians from the Comedy Store to be our cast. We're going to build an arena. We're going to call it Hyena Arena. This is all on a napkin in front of him. And he said, you're the only writer I know. You're a funny guy. Write me some stuff. I'll see you in a few months. And he hangs up. And I go to sleep, go back to sleep, and I wake up the next morning and I think, Parsons is crazy enough to pull this off. And so I started writing comedy bits for athletes, comedy bits for comedians. And we filmed this for an entire summer. I got a leave of absence from the Greeley Tribune, filmed this in the entire summer in Vail, Colorado, in this little Hyena Arena that we had built. And brought in Rich Little. He brought in all his buddies from the Comedy Store, including Sam Kinison, who was, nobody had, outside of LA, had heard of him at that time. And he was so broke that he and 3 other guys, Freddie Asparagus, who was in a few movies, Carl LeBove, who was in a few movies, and Dave, slept on our floor in Greeley, Colorado, floor of our apartment, for, you know, like a week and a half. And so I got to hang out with Sam Kinison, who was just the strangest guy and so spontaneously funny. They performed at the Comedy Works in downtown Denver, all four of them, as the National Sports Laugh Comedy Troupe. I got to write a bunch of the comedy for that. And Roseanne Barr was the headliner that night, and they had walked in and asked if they could go on. They put them on after Roseanne Barr, and they just killed. And Roseanne Barr was mad afterwards because she felt like she had been upstaged. And she's standing next to me at the bar, and she said, "I wish I knew who wrote their stuff." And I said, "Well, I wrote some of it." And she said, "Oh, really? Well, step into my office." And she walks into the office at well, not her office, but she leads me in there, this office, and she says, "Close the door in case I decide to do something nasty, because sometimes I do." And she asked me to write for her, and she wanted me to write about women's issues and all that, and I never did. I didn't write for Roseanne, but I wrote for Sam Kinison and a few others, and it was a thrill.
So before we get to participatory, you've done 300 some artist profiles here. So you've done comedy, you've done sports, and you've done arts. That's quite a wide range. So let's talk about art writing.
Well, I've always prided myself in being able to write anything: news, sports, features, columns, whatever. I'm blessed with that kind of versatility. My wife's a professional artist, Jean Basic, B-A-C-Z-U-K, and so when we came here to interview for the Herald, that's when I discovered this was also an art mecca, and you couldn't walk down the street in Carmel without passing two artists at any time of the day. And that was very interesting to me. After I got laid off by the Herald, I started freelancing for the Pinecone. I saw it as an opportunity to have a regular column and also honor all of these artists around here. I've done 329 in-depth feature stories on local artists, and that goes on every single week. I haven't missed a single week since 2017, I think is when I started.
So you know more about the art scene here than almost anyone then.
My wife reminds me a couple times a week of the total tonnage I do not know about art. Well, I'm a complete fraud, but I'm a good interviewer. So I try and tell their life stories and let them tell me
what
about
they do.
Their art.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm just the muse.
You're the conduit.
Yes.
Okay, and then let's talk about one of my heroes and your heroes, George Plimpton.
Yeah.
And participatory journalism.
Yeah.
And then kind of explain who Plimpton was and some of the crazy crap you've done.
Yeah, George Plimpton was this journalist who decided that as a journalist he was going to try and play professional football in a training camp with the Detroit Lions, and he did this kind of surreptitiously. The Lions, certain people knew who he was. Everybody else on the team didn't know who he was. So he was this quarterback from Yale. He tried out as a quarterback, and he wasn't really a quarterback, but he tried out for the Detroit Lions as a quarterback. Wrote a book about it, Paper Lion.
Yeah.
Outstanding book, still in print. He also pitched in a Major League Baseball All-Star game against, I forget who, Mays, Mantle, and Clemente, and
boxed Archie Moore.
He boxed Archie Moore, which is something I got to do.
He played hockey.
Yep.
He did stand-up comedy. He joined the circus. So he, and he ran the Paris Review of Literature.
Yeah.
So this
really
is this
intellectual person. I got to interview him once, and he was fascinating.
Yeah. So let's talk about you, because you got in the ring. You did this stuff. So let's talk about you as a participatory journalist.
Well, boxing first. I did a radio show for 12 years called the Ringside Boxing Show. I was the host. Interviewed all kinds of world champions and things. So I kind of became I had a little cult audience around the world because it was on the internet, and became a little local celebrity that way among boxing fans. So they held celebrity boxing at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Monterey, packed the house, the ballroom there, sold out crowd. It was a charity fundraiser, brought in famous boxers to box local people, and I got to be one of the celebrities. And the guy I got to box was Jose Celaya, who had been the #1 ranked welterweight contender in the world a couple years earlier at 147 pounds. And now he was pushing 30 and retired, but I got to be in the ring with him. Beforehand, we're standing there, we're all decked out in these satin clothes, satin shorts, satin robe, with my name on the back. My hands are taped, I got the gloves on, I got headgear on, Jose doesn't, and I'm standing next to Jose, we're waiting for our turn, watching Riddick Bowe fight somebody out there. And I turned to him and I said, Jose, what are the ground rules here? Am I allowed to hit you? And he just looked at me and started laughing. He said, you think you're going to hurt me? And I said, no. He said, bring it, pal. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens to you. So I got in close one time. We're in a clinch, and I turned on this body shot, and I got a little grunt out of him. I hit him right in the rib cage, and oh! And he saw the big grin on my face, and he pushed me back, and I went back a couple steps, and he went, boom, right there. And pulled the punch, I'm sure. Yeah. But man, I backed up about 4 feet and then fell on my butt. Oh. And he laughed at me. Third round, I'm about to have a heart attack. He sees this and he does the Roberto Duran, no mas, no mas. You know, I quit. This guy's too tough for me. So I won by a TKO.
Okay, really quickly, two other things. 120 mile an hour Laguna Seca.
Not my idea. They said, come on over here. They're giving rides to people on the back of a motorcycle. I get over there. It's a super bike rider that I hadn't heard of, but he said, you're the journalist? He said, jump on. So I get on the back of this motorcycle. He takes me out on one lap around Laguna Seca, 120 miles an hour, slowed down through the corkscrew. But yeah, it was like the second time in my life I've ever been on a motorcycle, and I'm glad I lived through that.
Okay, and then let's talk about the stunt plane.
A buddy of Sean Tucker's, one of his team.
And who is he?
Sean Tucker is this guy who every year does stunt flying in a biplane over the air show in Salinas. He's out there with a few other guys, and one of the other guys took me up in a plane upside down over Monterey Bay, took it into a power dive at one point, and it wasn't my thing, man. I was horrified. And afterwards, I laid in bed for a full day because I was just sick to my stomach and terrified. And but yeah, again, and Sean Tucker, same thing. He said, oh, you're out here to do this story? He said, hop in the plane. So,
so you never know what you're going to get from day to day.
And every day's different, you know?
What a beautiful life, man.
It is, really is.
Anyway, we could go on and on and on. I'm Mark Baer. You're watching YourTown TV. I'm with Dennis Taylor, and what a pleasure, man.
Hey, man. Only the second or third time that I've been interviewed.
Yeah, so you get to be on the other side of this.
Yeah, it was a privilege. Thank you.